Hello, welcome back to this Halion tutorial series, and we're doing deep dives. And this is the point at which I acknowledge defeat. I hold my hands up and say I can't do it anymore. I've tried to avoid acknowledging the existence of macros, and this is the point where I just capitulate, because the preset that I've chosen to look at is this organ preset, and we need to deal with the Model C. First things first. Every time I've talked about macros in the past, I've mentioned the fact that there's a script behind it, and you can at least see the script and have some kind of idea that there's this mask being applied to Halion. This is the first macro that we've dealt with where that's not true. To all intents and purposes, the Model C is basically a baked-in component of Halion. You cannot extract it out and make any sense of what's going on. And this is where I'm unhappy with the way they've done it. They've nearly made all of these macros completely modular and fully parsable, but in the case of Model C that's just not the case, and it is the case with other macros that you may come across as well. And so I just have to acknowledge that there is some element of internal integration here, and the divisibility of Halion and all of its subcomponents is not complete. When I open the program tree, I use the little plus symbol so that you can see, but there are actually so many inside Model C, it's easier to just right click expand tree and it just opens the whole damn lot. And now when we scroll down, you can see it is a big program, and most of this is dedicated to the Model C. And I'm going to prove that very briefly by loading up instead the initial program for the Model C, which is a default organ. And if we have a look at the default Model C program setup inside Halion, it's remarkably similar. So most of this stuff that we're going to be dealing with today is actually the implementation of the Model C inside Halion. So back to our spheric organ. I'm going to reopen the tree. Need to bring the instrument up into a slot, and now we can hear what's going on. So quite a slow attack and release, quite a gentle pad-like organ, very beautiful, lots of tremolo and rotary and lovely vibrato effects, a bit of phase in there. There's all sorts of stuff. It's a very lovely sound. It's not your typical kind of Jimmy Smith jazz organ sort of thing. And straight out of the gate at the program level, we see a ton of quick control assignments. We are going to be in a minefield with quick controls with this preset. When I did my tutorial on quick controls, I talked about how you can have multiple quick controls at different levels of the program, and they basically like override each other. This is going to be a perfect illustration of the case in point. So you can see that we've got a load of quick controls assigned here, and here are our settings. And when I play a note, there's your phase, there's the ring modulation coming in. So all of these controls are live, and because we have this program level selected, then we can see those quick controls. But if I select a different layer, then the quick controls will change, and now we're looking at a different context, and you can see that the quick controls have assigned because we're in the sound tab over here, and so we're getting a context view of a different layer. So that's going to just be one of those things we have to deal with. They've given you 8 knobs on the user interface down here, but that's not the end of the story, and there's multiple different contexts that these controls can operate under. And in every discussion that we have about this instrument, we're going to constantly have to keep referring back to the macro screen to see how that's relating to the program itself. Now, for the first time on any of these preset deep dives, we actually have something at the trigger level. It's actually playing chords. So each time I click one of these pads, it's playing chords. And down here is our trigger module, where we can see those assignments. So we've not explicitly dealt with triggers, let's take a little detour and have a look at those. Now, as things stand at the moment, the trigger pads aren't assigned to any keys on my keyboard. So let's say I want to assign them, those 8 pads, to all the notes starting at C0. So first of all, I'm going to find a C0 on my keyboard. There it is. So now if I right click, learn trigger note, place C0, it turns blue. From this point onwards, C0 is not going to play a C0, it's going to trigger that pad instead. I'll do a couple more. Learn trigger note, let's make that C sharp. Here I am just finishing off, just didn't need to see all of that boringness. So I've now assigned each one of those 8 pads to 8 keys. And so now each time I play C0, it doesn't play. You can see the C0 being played down, but it doesn't play the C0 of the organ, it's triggering the pad. That's an F sharp, and here's an E, and there's C. And you can right click to forget the trigger note if you want. If I want to change the pad assignment to a different chord, that's really easy to do as well. So that's the chord that it's currently playing. So let's say I want to assign it this higher chord instead. Really easy. Right click, snapshot chord, let go. See the pad's flashing. Click the pad again, and now that's set. It plays C0. Now it plays that new variant of the chord. Once I've set these trigger notes up, it might very well be that I want those 8 notes to be the 8 notes that I use whenever I'm assigning stuff to pads. That's super easy to do as well. Save trigger notes as default. Now every time I create a trigger pad module, it's going to come out with those 8 notes. This is where we rename all of the pads, and you can also snapshot variations. In the last tutorial we had 2 different flex phaser variations in slots 1 and 2, and it's a similar thing. If you've got your flex phaser set up, you choose the variation you want, go to your pad, click snapshot variations, and it just says got it, don't need to do any more. Go back over to your flex phaser, choose variation number 2, choose a new pad, right click, done, bang. Really simple. And so when we click on this instrument layer, we see for the first time that we've got a different set of quick control assignments. So in this quick control here, it's modulating between 2 different send levels, with auxiliary 1 at one end and auxiliary 2 at the other. And later on down in the bowels of the sound, we'll see that we've got 2 auxiliary FX buses here, and this is how you modulate between the level of the first one and the level of the second. And here we can see the auxiliary 1 is set to rotary, auxiliary 2 is set to the amplifier, and the name of the QC is, not surprisingly, rotary and amp mix. That in turn is then mapped to this knob. So it's the nasty tube amp effect. Jump quickly over there, let's have a quick look at that. So when we move this knob, it doesn't change any of the settings on the amp itself. It's changing the amount of send that's being thrown to this amp. That's why they're set up as auxiliary sends. And here we have master, attack and release levels for the instrument. So let's have a quick look at this. So there we can hear our slow attack. Pull this all the way down. Now it comes in straight away. Take all the release off. Okay, let's have a look. We said we're going to have to keep referring back to the macro page. See the knob in the interface changing? That's where it's mapped. Just take a note of this release knob. When it's at 0, something special happens. We'll get there soon enough. Here we have the other zone module that we never actually explicitly dealt with, and the reason I chose not to, I thought about it, it's so simple, it didn't need a video all on its own, but we can deal with it quickly here. So when you create an organ zone, you get a much smaller number of options than in any of the other zone types, and primarily it's just a load of harmonics. Now take a quick look at that. This look familiar? Right, so everything at 2 foot and above off. Go back over here. There they all are off. Don't worry too much about the 1 foot one being greyed out. That's a peculiarity of the Model C. It's this steel 1 foot effect over here. We'll deal with that another time. But this is where we set up our fundamental organ sound. So this is going to be a really kind of low, missing all of the higher harmonics kind of organ sound now. Bring some of them back in. Now, in addition to the organ zone, we also have these key click layers. We have key on click and key off click. Jump back over to the macro, and on the front page, key on click, key off click. That's easier to hear clicks when you've got some of the higher harmonics set. So there's the key on click. That pop is the key off click. Now, there it is. Turn the release to something other than 0. You don't hear it. Release back down to 0. Let's figure out why that is. Now the key on click is really simple. It's just a load of samples all mapped like that. We've dealt with sample editing before, so we don't need to worry too much about that. It's nice and simple. The key off click has this extra wrinkle. So let's have a look at this. We've not seen this before. This is called the Trig module. Brilliant name, makes me laugh every time. It's basically a way of scripting via a reasonably comprehensive logic matrix rules that will execute under certain conditions. And here what the module is saying is, if there's a note off anywhere on the keyboard range and the instrument's release time is set to 0. So this instrument.qc4, when we have a look at the instrument sound tab QC4 release, you can see that the envelope release for the drawbar zone, which is then tied in invisibly to the Model C, when this release is set to 0, this rule will trigger. So can you see that this light is on? The moment I turn the release value to anything other than 0 and go back to this module, the light's no longer on. Turn it down to 0 again. There's the light. Now let's start playing some notes. There's my C. And as soon as I let go of the key, this light comes on because it's just received a note off trigger. When both of these rules are true, so when there's a note off and the instrument release is set to 0, do something down here. So here you can see the cumulative expression. This isn't editable, this is just showing you that A and B is the rule by which the trigger is going to fire, and then this tells you what's going to happen when that rule is satisfied, and it basically says fire the corresponding sample underneath. So what all of that wraps up to is, when you let the key go, if you have no release set, play this tiny little poppy sound. And when I say tiny little poppy sound, when we go over to the sample page and we play these things, they are tiny. This is the level of detail that the sound designers have gone to. That's really beautiful detailing. And that's why the Model C sounds so good. It is a fantastic organ and is one of my go-to organs. I've got Arturia stuff and Contact stuff, lots of brilliant organs to choose from, and the Model C dukes it out with the best of them. Then we go back to our macro page and dial into taste. Awesome. Then we've got a ton of effects. A bit of vibrato. Here's the vibrato. See, it's set to C3. Let's change that to V3. Go back over to edit the vibrato MIDI module, and guess what? So I can't determine any means by which you can identify how that mapping is accomplished, but it's nothing to do with any of these quick control settings. There's nothing implicit. In fact, if I delete that vibrato entirely, vibrato has no effect. If I add a MIDI module back in, just magically comes back. Something under the hood is looking for a vibrato MIDI module in this instrument layer, and if it finds one, it's just doing something, and I can't see any means by which you can find that from the front end. I'm just kind of I'm learning to let it go, but it tilts the crap out of me. Then we've got a percussion module. So this thing only applies when percussion is on. Let's turn the entire manual layer off. So that's what the percussion module's doing. And now we see this steel 1 foot effect. This is a real world organ emulator. When percussion's on, you basically lose the 1 foot drawbar, so it just enables that feature. The percussion zone, when we nip over and have a look at that, then the only truly unique thing about the organ zone is that it has those percussion settings, and it's here, and you can see that in the percussion module it's on. We jump quickly over to the drawbars zone, it's off, and it adds that percussive, very sharp attack, very short duration sound that you get to an organ effect. Those two layers are then mixed together in the manual plus perc bus, and then we apply some extra effects to it. So this ring modulator here, let's set the mix to 3 o'clock, go over to our macro, ring mod, mix at 3 o'clock, turn it down to 9 o'clock. Sure enough, this ring modulator MIDI module inside the instrument layer is implicitly mapped to this little ring modulator section here. Ooh. Phaser. Turn the phaser to 3 o'clock. Go and have a look at the Model C quick controls. Phaser mix is still at 12 o'clock. Refer back to my quick controls tutorial if you ever see a disconnect between two controls like this, because it's saying QC phaser mix. Right click, have a look what its type is. If it's relative, remember the knob doesn't change to a relative effect. So this is applying more phaser rate, but we don't see this knob changing because they're both relative controls. You'll spend wasted hours trying to figure out why a knob's not working before you remember that the relative mode is real. Catches me out all the time. We briefly saw these auxiliary sends earlier, and we saw the way that we could modulate between one and the other, fade between aux FX1 and aux FX2. There are 4 auxiliary send buses available to us, and 2 have been used to this effect to be able to allow you to have that mixing between the rotary effect and the tube amp. So here are all our rotary settings, and that has its own dedicated page. The rotary effect is huge. As far as we've got a horrible thing here, let's just throw all that away, get to a more sensible sound. And I'll just pull the attack and release back down again. So here's our rotary drive at 0%, turn it up to 12 o'clock, jump over to the macro. Rotary drive just set to 12 past, just past 12. And same with the amp, we've already seen that effect. And then finally we've just got a couple of, delay and reverb right on the end, doing what they do. All of that gets mixed into the Model C bus, which is just a single point of contact to the outside world, flows onto the program bus and then out. So that is a very brief introduction to the Model C, but in the context of this awesome phasing, ring modding, sweeping, otherworldly organ effect. The functionality that they've baked into these macros, all of this stuff, with all of these excruciatingly sampled individual note, that's a level of detail that is just absolutely +1. Hope you found that useful, and if you did, please consider subscribing and hit notifications to find out when the next episode comes out. Hope to see you then. Thanks very much.